right, great to see you. First time I've felt good in 3 months. Everything's repaired. Jumping jacks, whatever. I'm so excited. Anyway, great to see you. We will start primarily at 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 23. Finish up a little bit about Absalom's murder of Amnon. One thing I wanted to mention that I don't think we talked about was there in chapter 12. At the end of chapter 12, you remember David has already been told by God that the child that he conceived with Bathsheba would surely die. And when the child becomes ill, we note that David goes into fasting and praying, and we're all aware of that, and he prays and prays and prays and does not eat all during that time. And then, of course, the child finally dies, and as you know the story, David then gets up and goes and worships, which is pretty cool. That in spite of God not answering his prayer in a positive way, David, of course, still worships the Lord and still puts his trust in God, which is really great. But I don't know have you thought about? And maybe I missed it when I was watching the class, but have you thought about the fact that David was praying that God would spare the child, even though God had told him that he was not going to spare the child? Why would David pray if God had already told him that one of his punishments was going to be the child would die?
The same reason Moses prayed to God for the Israelites, because God said, I'm going to wipe them all out and make them come out of Egypt.
Good. We have actually, I think it's interesting, there's a number of incidents like that where God does relent. You remember Hezekiah? What was his prayer? Yeah, God said, put your house in order. 3 days from now, you're going to die. And Hezekiah turns his face toward the wall and prays diligently and weeps, and God spares him and gives him 15 more years. The reason I wanted to bring that up is because of all the incidents in the Bible that are opposite of that, in which the person is told, thus and so is going to happen, and they don't pray. Hezekiah later was told that because of him showing the Babylonians all that was in his house, that because of that, after he died, God was going to do the same thing with Israel. And Hezekiah's response was, well, at least not in my lifetime. Goodness, it's your kids' and grandkids' lifetime. There's no Ahab, another great example. Ahab has a brief repentance to God, and God decrees some positive things. Does Ahab pray, and then when God is angry with him and tells him he's going to die? Or how about King Saul? The same way. Saul is told, tomorrow you're going to die. Does Saul go to God in prayer and beseech him with tears? No. So it's just interesting to see that when we seek God and when we pray God to God, we should not. I mean, how you could almost say, how impossible was it that God was going to actually answer that prayer positively? And yet David knew God well enough to know that God could care that much and that he may change his mind. I think that's good for us, isn't it? And so, anyway, I wanted to bring that up.
And also, when God doesn't answer our prayers, we don't need to be sulking about it.
Yeah.
Just worship God and go on.
Yeah, and knowing his mercy, knowing how much he cares, and knowing how many times he has made those kinds of changes and diverted his will because of our prayers. If he decides not to answer in the positive, we're going to go, he's got a good reason. he is a kind and merciful God, and if he felt it was the right thing, he would have. Anyway, I just thought that, I got to thinking a lot about that, and I thought that was really, really cool. Okay, so when you come to chapter 13 and verse 23, after, of course, Amnon has violated his sister, and Absalom, of course, told Tamar, basically, don't worry about it, come to my house and stay here, and kind of, I'll take care of this type of thing. And then you see the very beginning of verse 23. After 2 full years, Absalom had sheep shears at Baal Hazor, and which is near Ephraim, and he invites all the king's sons. So he has his plot then to kill Amnon. You notice how subtle it is. He invites all the king's sons, even invites who? He invites David. I'm sure that was a ruse, just a way to cover up what he was going to do. David, why don't you come too? Nah, he knew David wasn't going to come and do that. And so he really makes it. And then this 2-year period, look how patient Absalom is. If he had a plan that right after Amnon did what he did, he probably never would have, Amnon wouldn't have fallen for it. He's, I'm not stepping into that trap. But after 2 years goes by, Amnon is like, hey, I guess we're having a big old feast. And it just sets it up then for Absalom to begin to kill him. So then what strikes me is to make a brief summary right here in the middle of this, on the basis of 2 different men, David and his oldest son Amnon, falling to this terrible sin of lust and violating what one of the worst sins that you can do, and violating this, and then just look back and you say, to what advantage? Look at what those 2 brief sins, matter of minutes, if you will, just these brief sins created in consequences in life. Now we have it multiplying, dominoing by Absalom. Now he's going to murder Amnon, and Absalom is going to hate his father, and it just multiplies right down through. All sins do some things like that. These sins are especially damaging, and we really need to understand that. How many times you see in Proverbs, whether it's chapter 2, 5, 6, or 7, where he mentions this over and over again, the way of this adulterous sin is to the way of death. And you never return. Very, very strong principle that is given there. Okay, so then there's one other thing here that I want you to notice as you come to the end of chapter 13, and you see in verse 38. So Absalom fled and went to Geshur, and was there 3 years. So why does he go to Geshur? Pardon? That's where Grandpa lives. That's right. Talmai is in Geshur, and so he goes there. His would be his. Well, I guess his grandfather as king there, and so he escapes there, and he stays there for 3 years. This verse 38, and I don't know that there's I looked at this for a long time today, trying to figure verse 38 out. And the spirit of the king, that'd be David, longed to go out to Absalom because he was comforted about Amnon since he was dead. 14:1, now Joab the son of Zeruiah knew that the king's heart went out to Absalom. So when we read chapter 14, does it sound like the king's heart is going out to Absalom? No. Joab has to trick him. Joab has to do, he does all kinds of things trying to get David to bring Joab back to Jerusalem. And then after Joab comes back to Jerusalem, what does David do? Yeah, he shuns him for 2 more years. I mean, he ain't any part of him. And so this is an interesting little statement here. And there are some, well, you'll notice in your own marginal reading, the phrase long to go out to Absalom. If you look down in your marginal reading for some of your Bibles, you compare the Vulgate, which states cease to go out to Absalom, in the idea of cease to go out in a desire to do justice to him or to bring justice to him. So some Hebrew authorities believe that this is, there's a little challenge here in translating those words, and that this may not mean his heart's going out to Absalom as if, boy, I really miss my son, but he was wanting to go out and do something and bring justice to him. But after 3 years goes by, he mellows down and decides that he will no longer try to seek justice against him. But on the other hand, he has no interest in bringing Absalom back to him. Now, if that's what the text means, it fits the story better than his heart went out to Absalom, and yet when Absalom comes, he won't see him. And he has to get tricked, basically, into inviting him to come and all that. So I just throw that out there as a possibility of what, how you make sense of that, because it's kind of hard to make sense of it if his heart's going out to him and yet he won't allow him to come back, and when he does come back, he doesn't want to see him. He's obviously pretty angry with him. Okay, any questions, comments then leading up to chapter 14? All right, so as we prepare chapter 14, let's summarize the condition of David's kingdom. So up to chapter 11, when you have the sin of Bathsheba, how's David's kingdom look?
You can't lose.
Yeah, you can't lose. That's right. Every battle he wins, everything is going his way. He is the King of Kings. He's just fantastic. And then with the sin. All right, so you start with David's adultery and murder, and then what? Then you have Amnon's sin against his own sister. And what does David do about that? Zero, nothing. You can't help but think that the reason he doesn't do anything is because he's so convicted about his own sin that he's like, how can I go and do something about Amnon? By the way, Michael asked me this question a couple weeks ago, and I don't know if I answered as well as I should have. But he said, "Do you think Amnon deserved to die?" And my answer immediately was yes. However, and it's a kind of nebulous, but Deuteronomy 22. When you go out to Deuteronomy 22, you will see this particular passage at the very end of Deuteronomy 22. in verse 28. Deuteronomy 22:28. If a man meets a virgin who is not betrothed and seizes her and lies with her, and they are found, then the man who lay with her shall give to the father of the young woman 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife because he has violated her. He may not divorce her all of his days. Okay, so in all circumstances where either party is betrothed or married, it's the death penalty for sexual immorality. And he covers that earlier in chapter 22. But in this particular case, neither is betrothed, and he says, okay, he must marry her. He has to give the father 50 shekels of silver, and he may never divorce her. Any ideas why God... In my opinion, I would just have to argue with God and say, no, I think you got to kill the guy. That's the way I feel about it. And I wish our government would do that. You're dead tomorrow. It's just such an awful sin. But God goes, no, he doesn't do that. Any ideas as to why God may have made that allowance? By the way, before you answer that, I want to make very clear something. We read a lot of things in the law of Moses that are, I remember one fellow explaining it to me this way. It is contingency legislation. It is not God so much saying, here is my law. It is God saying, I'm suffering this, as he would say with divorce in the New Testament. I'm allowing this because of your hardness of heart. So we can't read these things like, if you beat your servant and knock his tooth out, what do you have to do? You got to let him go free. That's right. Okay? You got to let him go free. If you knock his eye out, you got to let him go free. So conclusion, when you beat your servant, be more careful. No, you can't draw that conclusion that way. And it's the same thing with Deuteronomy 24. He uses this if-then type of thing. If a man finds no happiness in his wife and he divorces her, and if she goes out and becomes another man's wife, and if he dies, or, and he goes on with this if, then she cannot go back to the first husband. These are rules he's making to give some protection, but they're not the law. And you remember Jesus saying that in Matthew 19, when the Pharisees said, well, the reason we're doing this is because Moses said we could. And he says, Moses told you that because of the hardness of your heart, because from the beginning it was not so. And a man shall leave his father and mother, cleave to his wife, the two shall become one flesh. And what God's joined together, man can't, you are not to separate. That's the law. God made this other thing because you guys were wicked. Did you see that point there? Dan,
contingencies for social injustice.
Yes, good point.
Because the wife, whoever the woman that's defiled, she can never be married.
Yeah, and who's going to take care of her?
Yeah, and she's got to have some rights. She's got to be taken care of in some way. And so, like you said, God makes allowances for that with these contingencies. Right.
And we today would, our first thought is, if I'm a woman, how do I married to this rapist? Get him away from me. But this is a way that she can be taken care of. That's right.
I don't think God ever promised that to be a great marriage.
No.
But he made contingencies that somebody's going to have some retribution for that.
Well, and not only that, that does hopefully give her some protection from a guy who that thought might go through his mind. If I do this, I'm going to be strapped with her and taking care of her, and I've got to pay Dad 50 shekels of silver, and that's not chump change, and all those things. Right, Callie? Exactly. Yeah, Yeah, that's right. So anyway, just to give you, a little heads up on some of those things, yeah.
50 shekels of silver is triple the typical bride price.
Okay.
So that would be one of them. And oftentimes, like young women who are unmarried have no protections whatsoever, whereas married women have more power socially.
Right.
So that also may be part of it. As well, there's a lot of different things that both Amnon and Absalom do that are illegal, where it's also illegal to sleep with your half sister.
Yeah, right.
So that is another one. And then, so my question with that one is David's supposed to be the kinsman redeemer, blood avenger for his daughter, and he does nothing. So then, is Absalom just taking up that mantle and saying, "You did okay,
I know.
I won't do it. I will."
I'm sure that's the way Absalom's thinking.
So does it count as murder, or is it just executing justice?
Yeah, I think it kind of is murder, but you know exactly how Absalom's thinking. There probably isn't a brother anywhere. If Dad didn't do something about this, I'm going to do something about this. I mean, you do feel for his desire for justice, no doubt.
So much of the punishment they get is embarrassment, public embarrassment.
Yes.
And there's wave after wave after wave. It says what's going to happen to his wives, what's going to happen there.
Yeah.
And then he has a son that I think of the saying, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. What are the people thinking? What are they speaking about? And how does that reflect on God?
That's right.
And there's a lesson in that.
Absolutely. And you just see the not a surprise that when we get to chapter 15, Absalom is able to easily grab the hearts of the people. There's nothing worse than just seeing immorality and corruption within the federal government, as you can see in this particular case. And so it's something. So when you add all that up, it's David's adultery and murder. Amnon rapes David's daughter. David is seemingly helpless and fails to act. Absalom then takes revenge and murders his brother Amnon. David grieves over it, but still doesn't do anything and act on this. And then chapter 14 then begins with Joab manipulating David to bring Absalom back, which then sets up the overthrow of David's kingdom. So it's just everything David does or doesn't do, he just keeps multiplying consequences to his original sin. So really tough situation. All right, so we get to chapter 14. And you see Joab wants to bring back Absalom into David's good graces. Okay, the story's pretty simple, and all of that. But so without getting into it right now, why? Why does Joab want to bring this goofball back? Any ideas? Mara?
Likely be the next king.
Yeah. See now, Absalom, which number is he? Amnon was firstborn. Absalom is thirdborn. Chapter 3, verse 3. Who's secondborn? Abigail's son. I don't know how you say his name, Kelib or Keliab or Kilib or whatever. But the second son is actually, you would think, be next in line, but nothing is said about him. So there is some supposition that possibly he's died by now. And so he's not a part of this.
He's a conniving guy. He sees the power Absalom has and how conniving Absalom is as well. He's like, he probably murdered his other brothers, so I'm trying to protect myself.
Yeah, so this is obviously to Joab. Joab's no dummy here. I mean, he's trying to do something to protect himself. And so he immediately wants to bring Absalom back, and he gets Absalom in David's good graces. What does Joab do in 1 Kings when Adonijah tries to set himself up as king? What does Joab do? He joins him. That's right. So he would have known who God wanted as the next king, which is it? Solomon. Solomon is the one that God has designated and David has designated to be the next king. What's wrong with Solomon being king if you're Joab? Okay. He did what? Wait.
Well, the whole situation killed Uriah. Joab arranged to kill Uriah, but not his dad. There's a whole bunch of bad blood.
Okay, so yeah, there's the killing of Uriah, but okay, we got to get to that a little bit. I don't think you're thinking of the right person here. Yeah.
It's Bathsheba. Bathsheba's another song. So I get that.
I know.
I get that Uriah is not Solomon's dad.
Right.
I think that if I'm Joab, I might have some concerns that Bathsheba has convinced Solomon that I'm not a good dude. I've arranged for his dad to die in front of him, right?
Okay, let's let's back up here. You're getting me confused. let's just talk here about Joab for a second. What would David have against Joab? He murdered Abner in cold blood. That's right. And David has not forgotten that. And Joab knows that David is angry with him. If he can get a king, the next king, Absalom, if he can pick him to be king, him and Absalom can be really good friends, especially if he does something to get Absalom back. When that doesn't work and it backfires on him, and of course Absalom ends up trying to overthrow the kingdom, which Joab was not interested in that apparently. But when he does that, then later he tries to get on the side of Adonijah when David is on his deathbed. So, and by the way, in the meantime, Joab murdered in cold blood another one of David's captains out of jealousy. So things are mounting up, and the last thing, Joab is convinced David's not going to do anything to him while he's alive, but I'm sure he's afraid of exactly what did happen. On David's last breath, he says to Solomon, "Kill that man." He killed 2 generals, 2 of my captains in cold blood. Do not let his gray hair go down to the grave in peace. Michael, did you say something?
I think that could definitely be part of it. I think maybe there's also just this vein of throughout the whole story, Joab thinks he knows better than David on pretty much everything.
Yes.
Like, hey, don't kill Abner because he's our friend now. Oh no, I'm going to go kill Abner. Don't kill him. Hey, don't kill Absalom. He kills Absalom in cold blood. So there seems to be some sort of arrogance on Joab's part that, like, even though the king has given me explicit instructions, I know better than him.
And I can do what I want.
And what a lesson for us as our king sometimes.
That's right. That's right. Even though I might argue that when Joab killed Absalom, that was probably the best thing he could have done. But still, he disobeys David straight out. Yeah, no doubt. So.
If he puts his money behind the younger horse, he gets to be
Uh-huh.
advisor number 1.
Good.
And I think
Yeah.
anytime he's knocked out of the spot of advisor number 1, he's like, I gotta find somebody else that I can make them more important
Yeah.
because they need to be.
You can just imagine this put into a movie, And you can just once you do that and you watch Joab, you go, ooh, he's a slimy skunk. You know, he really is manipulating the politics here, John.
One thing that's always struck me about Joab, I see him as more, he seems to have a very distinct loyalty to Israel as a nation, but not to God.
Yeah.
So he is very invested in, a lot of his actions are directly associated to what he thinks is best for the kingdom, and not for God's kingdom.
Yeah.
So he makes decisions based on his loyalty to the country, to the kingdom, to what's right for the physical nation, but not for what God's will
Yeah.
is. So
That's
there's a disassociation there.
Yeah, that's a great analysis. I hadn't thought about it exactly that way, but that's a good analysis. Yeah, he wants the kingdom as he wants himself to be part of it, but he's looking at the kingdom. You do not see him ever saying a whole lot about God. With the exception of 2 Samuel 24, doesn't he? When David wants to number the people, Joab suddenly goes, why would you want to do this? You know, and he seems to tried to get him not to do something that was very foolish on David's part, right? Hey, great. That's great. Great point. Okay, so we see this picture where in verse 2, Joab gets this woman of Tekoa, apparently a well-known wise woman who comes and does a Nathan with David, right? Comes and tells a sweet little story about how she had 2 sons, and one son had killed the other, and now the Avenger of Blood is going to take that son away, and then I won't have any children, and would you spare my other son? And David says, okay, verse 11, as the Lord lives, not one hair of your son shall fall to the ground. Then verse 12, then the woman said, please let your servant speak a word to my Lord. And he said, speak. And the woman said, why then have you planned such a thing against the people of God? For in giving this decision, the king convicts himself, inasmuch as the king does not bring his banished one home again. We must all die. We are like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. But God will not take away life, and he devises means so that the banished one will not remain an outcast. Well, what do you think of that argument there? When she says, we must all die, we are like water spilled on the ground, what does she mean? Yeah, it's over and done with. That was years ago. Everybody has to die. Amnon died. Let's leave this alone. So he pulls that business, and then she actually brings God into it. God will not take away life. He devises a means to bring a banished one back. This is all, God wants this to happen. I don't know where she gets the idea God wants this to happen. It's the biggest mistake ever. But she just blows a lot of smoke here. And David is I don't know, he seems to be so confused and and in the clouds at this particular point. He finally goes, okay, and then he turns around, and down in verse 18, and the king answers the woman, do not hide from me anything I ask you. The one said, let the Lord speak, my Lord speak. And the king said, is the hand of Joab with you in this? So he finally goes, Joab's behind this, isn't he? She goes, you're so smart, King. That's right. Joab is behind this and all of that. But talks him into doing it anyway. And verse 21, tells Joab, behold, now I grant this, go and bring the young man Absalom back. And Joab falls on his face, he pays homage, he blesses the king. He says, today your servant knows that I found favor in your sight, my lord the king, and the king has granted the request of his servant. Bunch of malarkey, Joab. But I don't think anyway, that Joab has any idea what Absalom is about about to do and how he's going to try to take the kingdom, because obviously Joab doesn't join him in this, fights against him, and does kill Absalom. So everything backfires on what Joab, whatever it was that Joab was desiring. And of course, in verse 24, David just simply says he can abide in his own house. I'm not seeing him. And Joab then will not let him go to the king or even try to get that. And another 2 years then goes by. And finally, what does Joab do what does Absalom do in order to get an audience with the king? He burns Joab's field right at the time of the harvest. Okay, so let's think a little bit about this Absalom fella. Tell me about his character.
It's a beautiful hot mess.
He's a beautiful hot mess. Hot head. Yeah, he's a mess too. That's right. Yeah. He's really a mess. So first, you mention his beauty. What's he do? He cuts his hair every year. He weighs it out. Apparently, a big old ceremony. It's real thick and long. He doesn't know the passage in 1 Corinthians that says it's a shame for a man to have long hair. He just doesn't understand that. I hope you all caught that. What did you say, Michael? Oh. I bring that up because, as I think most all of you know, the statement in 1 Corinthians 14, do you not know it's a shame for a man to have long hair, was cultural for that time and was not nature, that is, from birth. Every man knows it's a shame for him to have long hair because Nazarites had long hair. Samson had long hair. John the Baptist would have had long hair. All of that. And Absalom showed his hair was a beauty to him. So be careful how you use that passage is the reason I bring that up. Okay, all right. So he does that, and so we see all of these different things. Now he's like a child. He burns his field down. I mean, this is good food. This is how you survive and live. And he just goes out, burns it down.
He doesn't burn his field down. He burns his neighbor's field down. It's very different things. Because burn down Joab's field. That's completely different story.
Wait a minute.
Doesn't matter much.
Did I get that wrong? He doesn't burn down Joab's field?
Yeah,
Joab's his neighbor, and Absalom burns Joab's field.
Yeah.
So, if I have my toy, and then I just throw somebody else's toy into the river, I still have my toy.
Yeah, that's right. So he didn't care. But that's the thing. That's a picture of his arrogance and what he's doing. Yeah. Danny, did you have to?
I think it's safe to say he liked attention.
He what?
He liked attention.
Yeah.
The center of attention.
Yeah, he liked to be the center of attention, for sure. That's the way that was. Okay, so you have that, and then finally, of course, Joab, when that happens, I don't know why Joab gives in to him. But Joab's like, okay, I'll get you before the king. So he gets him to go before the king, and of course David then accepts him back, kisses him. Everything seems to go well. Chapter 15, verse 1. After this, Absalom got himself a chariot and horses and 50 men to run before him. What do you read into that? Okay, well, it doesn't seem David gave it to him. He just goes out and gets it. But what's the message he's sending?
Elevating himself.
Yeah, he's elevating himself. Guess what? If you go to 1 Kings chapter 1 and verse 5 and read what Adonijah did when he decided to take the kingdom, he did exactly the same thing. Got himself a chariot, got 50 men to run in front of him, and it's a message I'm going to be the next king. He's exalting himself and putting himself forward that way. Guess what Samuel said about this in 1 Samuel 8? If you go out and get a king, you know what he'll do? He'll get a bunch of men to run in front of him and proclaim him to be king and set himself up and have a chariot. That's exactly what Absalom does, exactly what Adonijah does later on. So he works this system here, and then he goes up, and how early in the morning does he get up to go be at the king's gate? Really early. So he wants to be there before anybody gets there, and when somebody comes and they say, I've got a judgment to be before the king, what does Absalom do? Unfortunately, we just don't have a good king right now. We don't have anybody that would judge in your favor, but it's obvious. If there was a really good judge in Israel, it'd be in your favor. And if the person tried to bow down before Absalom, what did Absalom do? Did you catch that? Yeah, he'd kiss him. He'd go, whoa, here. You know, he'd go, hey, I'm a man of the people here. I wouldn't be like the king we've got now, who's a despot. You know, that's exactly what he'd be. But so he's trying to throw that all off. So he steals the hearts of the people and tries to make it out that whatever David would have decided would have been against them. And of course, that really, I'm sure, was not true. David would have given justice. But in this particular case, he's just working the system. And then how long does he do that? 4 more years. Now, when you're learning about Absalom, patient fella. He's taking his time. He's setting this up really, really well. And he's got a design all the way through on how he is going to take the throne. Now, David's king, and all this is going on outside of your palace. Yeah, you have to ask the question. Of course, the passage doesn't tell us, but you have to ask the question, David, are you alive? Do you have any awareness? Are you in a closet somewhere? Are you not aware of what's happening in your own city? And what your son is doing? Are you so demoralized by what you have done that you're like a parent with a wild child, and you just don't want to deal with it and just let him have his way? And that just seems to be what he's doing. And it is really amazing how much takes place, and David somehow either is unaware of it, doesn't want to be aware of it, just can't convince himself that Absalom would do this, whatever it is. But as verse 12 says, the conspiracy grows strong with the people, and then Absalom, his power just keeps on increasing. And finally, you see Absalom setting it up. In verse 13, a messenger came to David saying, the hearts of the men of Israel have gone after Absalom. I passed over the fact that Absalom actually goes to David and says, I'd like to go down to Hebron and be able to have a big feast and pay my vows. And so King David says, well, yeah, fine, just go on down there. He grabs 200 men from Jerusalem who are invited guests, They don't even know what's going on. Brings them all down there, offers sacrifices, and even Ahithophel, the Gileonite, David's counselor from the city of Gilo, the conspiracy grows strong, and the people are. Now, Ahithophel joining this is a major blow to David because of his ability to give wise counsel. I think I've got just a few seconds here to follow this line. Ahithophel, Bathsheba's father, 2 Samuel 11:3, is a fellow named Eliam. Eliam is, or Eliam, whatever you'd say it, is the son of Ahithophel. This makes Ahithophel Bathsheba's grandfather. That would mean that Ahithophel's motivation to overthrow David in retribution for David violating his granddaughter and then murdering his grandson-in-law. So you have that connection. I did not know that before, and that really sets up, you go, oh, so Ahithophel, his close friend, is going to betray him. And that's going to be an integral part of the rest of this next story. Okay? All right, very good, guys. Next week we take off from this. We're having a special prayer singing period, but then in 2 weeks we'll pick it up from here. Okay?